Now, at this point, you should be fairly familiar with map elements, adding north arrow, scale bar, stuff like that. Don't really need a north arrow on this map, maybe because it's Vancouver and we all know where that is. We do want some scale information, whether scale bar or scale text. That's super important here. But one thing we do need is a legend, right? We've got this data classified. We need to show some stuff. If you click on the legend button, if you just click on it, it should give you the default legend, and then you can kind of drag it around the bottom if you want, for instance. And so a few points about this legend. If you expand it over here, you can see that it lists all these different things. And note that it's got all these zero values. It's really hard to read, right? There's a lot of different things going on here. So you can edit the layer name, your properties, text symbol, or you can edit like what's displayed on the legend. I mean, you can change the sizing, fonts, and stuff like that with this text symbol stuff. But one thing you can't really do in the legend itself is get rid of all these zero values. Arc defaults to having a whole bunch of zeros. It's really unnecessary. We're dealing with housing costs that's in dollars. We don't need all these zeros. You go to the symbology tab and you click on the layer of interest. It should probably default to here. You got your data classified by. But if you click this advanced symbology button, there's a drop down format labels. Click that. And then you can edit how many decimal places you want to round your data to. So for instance, if you don't want any, put 0. And then it should update, and you'll note that there are now no decimal places on here, right? So that's one sort of point. We might want to edit this legend text. There's no houses that are $405, right? So two options. You could change the label to just say less than 405, or if you want to be precise, you could open the attribute table and find out what the minimum housing value is. If you right click on housing, you can go to statistics, say the minimum value is 405, right? So go back to symbology, just minimize this. Right. It might even be worse. Sometimes the classification scheme gets a little wonky and it doesn't update when you, so I had this classified before I excluded the value. Note how it changes, for instance. So if you do the data exclusion, you might need to sort of update this before you exclude things. Before you get the final version of your legend, if you will. But so make sure these values make sense. Make sure you don't have any zero values here. And if you go back to the legend element under the map layout, you should be able to change some things. So for instance, you don't want to show the layer name, right? Not particularly important. You can get rid of it. You want to be a little more explicit about this. It's not housing, it's housing cost. And then maybe a dollar sign. You can be more explicit about that too. Now, I've said this a couple times under legend. If you click this legend button here, we don't need a title for our legend. You can just turn it off. Right? There's no point to call a legend, right? It's a bit redundant, so I covered that in module 3. And so you can see that this sort of default spacing doesn't work super great. Arc, unfortunately, has fairly limited options. when it comes to getting the layouts of their legends. This is something they really need to work on, in my view. And the reason that if you take cartography, they actually have to use a different software to make sort of the fanciest maps, right? But no matter what you do, you're going to end up with this sort of ugly looking, sort of multi-column thing. But one approach, right? Put your legend maybe on your map. You can say keep in a single column and have it like so, right? And then it's large enough that you can read it, but also tucked away in an area, part of the map that doesn't have any data on it, that's not super important anyway. Right? So again, the spacing of this map's not optimized. I'm going to kind of leave that to you. Figure out where you want to put your sort of scale text, your data source, and all that kind of stuff. But I just wanted to give you a pointer on how to sort of edit the legend item a little bit, right? So there's lots of different things you can do, play around with the spacing and stuff like that. But in my view, sometimes it's just easier to just kind of keep it simple and don't try to come up with, say, a multi-column legend or something like that.